On a trip to Morocco, my girlfriend and I were characteristically late for the return flight. We had traveled by bus from Chefchaouen, a well-known cannabis-producing region, to the capital, Rabat, and it had been a rather long, uncomfortable journey. It was made a lot worse by the fact that for the last couple of days, I had had a rather loose stomach. We got to the airport with about 40 minutes until our flight took off, so we rushed through check-in, changed what little money we had left, pushed to the front of the passport queue, and then tried to get through security. At that point, we were rather flushed from all the rushing, and I, more than I previously thought was possible, needed the toilet. Inevitably, the guy in security pulled us to one side to take a closer look at our bags, and after emptying everything, decided he should get another security guard to take a further look. I then made the mistake of telling him that I very much would like to go to the toilet while we waited, because I had quite a bad stomach. He asked if I had taken anything, to which I replied, "I have, some Imodium, but it hadn't helped." He then asked if I needed to have a doctor to check out my stomach. I said that I was okay. I just really needed to toilet. I then realized that we had very different understandings of what was wrong. Telling me that he knew that I came to the airport from Chefchaouen, he must have checked my exit visa or guessed. He suggested that my bad stomach might be something to do with all the drugs I had taken, or was smuggling in my stomach. I looked nervous, he told me. I tried to explain that I needed the loo. At that point, out came 2 armed police officers with sniffer dogs, and we were dragged to the corner of security and we waited, confident, if a little nervous, for them to check out our bags. I then got taken to an interview room where a police officer poked at my stomach while quizzing me about my drug consumption habits. I told him that, of course there is cannabis in Chefchaouen. You get offered it all the time. But, of course I didn't take any. He then said, after a little conferring, that I would have to wait while they found a doctor to examine me. I tried to explain once more that this was a big misunderstanding and I just needed to go to the toilet. But the more I remonstrated, the more it seemed inevitable that I would end up with a latex-gloved hand exploring my most intimate parts. We waited, my girlfriend in tears. The police now were giggling and taking what seemed to be a remarkable amount of joy from our misery. Eventually, somebody arrived to examine me, the original security officers. I asked about their medical credentials, but I was told I didn't have a choice. Round the corner, I went with him. We stopped outside a disabled toilet and he pointed to the door. Finally, I thought. And then it became obvious that the disabled toilets were in fact the examining room, and he was coming in with me. He then told me that he was going to check if I was lying or not, and told me that if I needed to go, I should go now, in a rather threatening tone, although he might have just been pissed off that he had drawn the short straw of watching me defecate. I was just about to ask if he could leave me alone while I went, but I no longer cared. Down came my trousers, and while I enjoyed an explosive thundering poo, my bottom turning temporarily into an aerosol of feces, I looked up at him, and with a smug smile that said, "Well, I did tell you." After a minute or so, he left me to it. And by the time I returned, my girlfriend was packing our bags once more, still a little shaken and uncertain as to where they had taken me. The plane ended up being delayed, so we even got our flight. But it's taught me a lot. There are always bastard cops wherever you are. Learning your rights is up there with remembering your passport. And make sure you carry money in case you need to bribe somebody in a disabled toilet in an airport in order to get home. My first venture into globetrotting was quite the saga. It all started with a simple plan, a flight from Zurich to Melbourne, with a quick layover in Dubai. I was flying Emirates and had no worries. Little did I know my 24-hour journey would turn into a 38-hour, nerve-testing marathon. The first curveball came when our plane, originally destined for Dubai, was rerouted to land in Abu Dhabi due to some thick, unrelenting fog. The 5-hour delay was manageable, and I was pretty laid back about it, sure that the renowned Emirates staff would have everything under control. When we finally touched down in Dubai, though, chaos ensued. It wasn't just a few flights that had been delayed. It was a cascade of them. The airport was a sea of stranded passengers, all desperately vying for a spot in one of the endless queues in front of the Emirates counters. Securing a spot in the queue, I hunkered down for a long wait. From noon to midnight, I stood there, growing increasingly frustrated as the line barely seemed to move. All around me, patience wore thin and tempers flared. The airport staff tried to pacify us with water and some snacks early on, but it was clearly not enough. The evening brought more bad news. There were no more seats on the Australia-bound flights for the day, and Emirates was handing out hotel vouchers. I was so exhausted that all I could think was, just get me out of this airport. Finally, close to 2 a.m., I reached the counter, only to be told that they couldn't rebook my flight because I'd booked via a third-party website. Feeling utterly defeated, I stumbled away, found a corner, and just sat there, feeling the tears well up. I couldn't even call my booking agent because my phone wasn't getting any signal and the ATMs were not cooperating. Eventually, an Emirates staff member took pity on us. He collected everyone's tickets and passports, promising to sort it out. After what felt like an eternity, he returned with new boarding passes. Relief washed over me. I was finally getting out of this airport. We had to sprint to the gate to catch the flight, which was scheduled to depart in just 30 minutes. As I settled into my seat, I kicked off my shoes that felt 2 sizes too small due to my swollen feet and finally allowed myself to relax. I slept through the entire 20-hour flight to Melbourne, the trauma of the last 38 hours taking its toll. It was the late 1980s. I was just a young man in my early 20s, full of youthful enthusiasm and a sense of invulnerability. I found myself in Kinshasa, the heart of Zaire, which is now known as the Democratic Republic of Congo. My journey entailed a brief stopover at the city's airport, where I was meant to spend a mere 2 to 3 hours, basking in the warmth and noise of what was optimistically labeled as the transit lounge. Barely had a few moments passed in the so-called lounge when I was approached by a man who quickly flashed his police ID at me. He requested to inspect my passport and ticket, and after a brief look, he smoothly pocketed them. With an authoritative gesture, he beckoned me to follow him. Our path led us downstairs, bypassing customs and immigration as if they didn't exist, and ultimately to the airport police station. I was then ushered into an intimidating interrogation room where we were joined by a pair of my newfound friends' co-workers. They offered their assistance in ensuring I boarded my flight, for a fee, of course. With politeness covering my anxiety, I declined, firmly stating that my ticket was perfectly in order. A similar proposition was extended for the guarantee of my checked baggage reaching the plane, to which I repeated my refusal, feigning confidence in the system. I tried expressing my lack of cash at hand, only to be told they were more than willing to accept traveler's checks. The cat-and-mouse game continued for hours, with each party pretending they weren't participating in a standoff over bribes. Finally, the plane I was supposed to be on arrived, and my unsolicited benefactors decided to give up their ruse. The next thing I knew, I was standing at the base of the aircraft steps, caught in a verbal tug-of-war with the flight crew who were understandably reluctant to let me board without the necessary documents. An officer, eventually, made his way across the tarmac and handed me back my passport and ticket. It wasn't until I was comfortably ensconced in my seat on the plane that the gravity of the situation truly dawned upon me. What had felt like a high-stakes game, which I'd triumphed in, could have landed me in serious trouble. For the sake of a meager sum of £20, which admittedly was a significant amount for me back then, I had flirted with the risk of missing my flight, or even worse, ending up in a Zairean jail. It boggled my mind to think of how long it would have taken the British consulate to realize I was missing and then to actually locate me. The thought of what could have transpired in a jail cell during that time sent a chill down my spine. But youth often cloaks one in a sense of invincibility and ignorance, and I was no different. It was my first venture outside Europe, and I was far from worldly wise. Thank goodness that the in-flight drinks in economy were complimentary back then, else I might have found myself squandering the equivalent of £20 in an attempt to drown my anxieties with liquid courage.